And in 2013, there was an event by the Minister of Economics, Rösler. He had invited Peter Thiel to a event in Berlin. Maybe it was a startup event. And also at the event, I met Jörg von Minkwitz, which was one of the Bitwala founders. And he was saying, well, I like Bitcoin and I have an incubator. I incubate and build Bitcoin companies. And it didn't click. So I left the event and it didn't click. So 2013, it didn't click. So that was very close. It could have, but it didn't. and then it started to click 2015 because I re-met Jörg von Minkwitz, the Bitwala founder, and Jan Goslicki, the other founder, at 8 o'clock in the morning in a hotel lobby, and they pitched one of their startups. And there was Bitwala. So with that, we went home and started to look at the company. And during due diligence, I thought, why not buy a Bitcoin? And I went to Bitcoin.de, the German exchange.
Yeah.
And I just bought one Bitcoin for 300 euros. And I was like, oh no, the money is probably wasted. 300 euros, you can take the family out for dinner like 4 times or so, and have a good time. And you're blowing the money on the Bitcoin. And I just kept the Bitcoin.
As the price keeps going up and up, some people keep holding out for yet higher prices and refuse to sell. Satoshi Nakamoto. Welcome back to What is Your Bitcoin Story podcast, where we explore the incredible journey of those who have leaped deep down the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Gigi, and I'm thrilled to have Alex van Frankenberg joining us for a conversation about his journey into the fascinating world of Bitcoin. Alex is a huge Bitcoin enthusiast and a seasoned professional in the venture capital / startup scene. He's been the managing director of high-tech Gründer Funds, I hope I pronounced that correct, since 2005, and has over 2 decades of experience working with startups and innovations. Prior to that, he held the various roles at Siemens Corporation Technology and Anderson Consulting. So without further ado, let's dive into Alex's Bitcoin story and find out how this brilliant mind got hooked on decentralized revolution. Alex, welcome to the show.
Well, hi, Gigi. I'm very happy to be on the show, and I'm very much looking forward to the conversation.
Likewise, it's been a pleasure meeting you earlier this summer in Prague, which was it was a melting point of beautiful minds, beautiful people, and yeah, we just somehow managed to introduce ourselves in the hallways. And I'm always looking to get fellow Bitcoiners on the show. And I believe, Alex, you are the first person with a venture capital background that's coming on the show. So I'm really looking forward to what you have to share with us and your perspective of where we are and where we're going. So we'll hit it off with a question like we do to all the guests. So what was your first spark that interested you in Bitcoin, and was there any specific moment or event that led you down this path?
Yes, I mean, there were a few touch points that I had where I didn't understand Bitcoin. And then there was one, and I can come to that point in a second, where it really hit it off. And I think what's important, and I'd like to explore that a little bit, was the preparation phase of Bitcoin. So I was, and that was really long. Actually, it was decades. And there were many events that prepared me for Bitcoin. And I would like to start with one event, and I'll explore that in more detail in my book, actually, which will come out later next year. And when I was in kindergarten, that's a very long time ago, obviously, we had a reward system. The kindergarten teachers had a reward system. You got a black point when you were like a good kid, and a red point when you were not a good kid. And when you were a very, very good kid, you get a little cloth, a little piece of cloth. And those pieces of cloth were really a lot. They were a status symbol. Some had many. I had just 2. And you could trade those cloth for favors, for sweets. And they were really hard to get. So at some point, the teachers changed and the new teacher was coming in, and she gave out more cloths. So easier. And then there was some discussion, and all of a sudden they gave out all the clothes for free. And it's a true story. And what I really experienced, I think I was 5 or 6 years old, was a pure hyperinflation. Because when those cloths were given out for free, they were sitting in the corner and no one used them anymore. So I did really experience in this very little, tiny, unimportant world as a kindergarten child, a hyperinflation, and and that obviously I didn't understand it, but it, I didn't forget it. It's like 50 years later.
It stick with you, certainly.
So and there's many other events that prepared me for Bitcoin. For example, I bought my first stock as a very young apprentice working in a bank right before the 1987 stock market crash, and just really a few weeks before, and then and that stock market crash was very significant. I think the Dow Jones was losing more than 25%. So what I experienced is. And of course, we didn't know what would happen. What I experienced was like a sort of a breakdown of the stock market, which was quickly healed by Greenspan lowering the interest rates. And when you go further, there were a few more breakdowns or close breakdowns of the system. In the late 90s, the big hedge funds that collapsed. I think Russia defaulted. Obviously, the .com crash, which was very painful. I was working for a startup and it failed. It was tough to get a new job. And then obviously the great financial crisis, 2007 until 2009. So I think we had experienced, and I think everybody has in a way, certain events that made you learn about inflation, but then also that taught you that the system might become under great stress. So my very first, so that's the pre Bitcoin preparation phase, and then obviously 2008-9 Bitcoin came around. I didn't hear about it at all. So actually, what happened? I think 2012 or 13. I might have heard about it, and my thought was, well, Bitcoin might be limited, but there's an unlimited number of cryptocurrencies, so it's not worth looking at it. I didn't understand it clearly, and I think I heard it multiple times, and it didn't click at all. And in 2013, there was an event by the then Minister of Economics, Rösler. He had invited Peter Thiel to a event in Berlin. Maybe it was a startup event. And two things happened at the event. First of all, Peter Thiel explained his way of identifying great innovations, basically by saying, what is true that might be very disruptive that no one understands. And I was there and trying to find something which is true, but nobody understands. I didn't find anything. So I was like, man, you're working venture capital and you don't have any idea about some big innovation, except for one thing. I thought back then the financial system is under heavy, heavy stress, and not really everybody understands. There was like around the Cyprus going bankrupt, and the crisis of like the European states, Greece and others. So I left the event with like the thought, I have no clue, no idea. If I had talked to Peter Thiel, I couldn't say anything to him except for the financial system being under heavy stress. And also at the event, I met Jörg von Minkwitz, which was one of the Bitwala founders. And he was saying, well, I like Bitcoin and I have an incubator. I incubate and build Bitcoin companies. And it didn't click. So I left the event and it didn't click. So 2013, it didn't click. So that was very close. It could have, but it didn't. And then it started to click 2015 because I re-met Jörg von Minkwitz, the Bitwala founder, and Jan Goslicki, the other founder, at 8 o'clock in the morning in a hotel lobby, and they pitched one of their startups. And there was Bitwala, and Bitwala actually eventually fails, very, very, very sad in a way. Now they restart, but the original idea was great because what the idea was is they wanted to use the blockchain technology, the Bitcoin blockchain technology, to transfer money. So you want to transfer euro to Japan or maybe even to Africa, and then they propose to exchange the euro to Bitcoin, send the Bitcoin to wherever in the world, and then convert it back into the local currency. So within like 10 minutes or so, in a very short time, you could have sent money very cheap because the fees were very low then anywhere in the world. And I thought that was a great idea. So my first real understanding was not Bitcoin, but the Bitcoin blockchain technology solving a problem, the money transmitting problem. So we thought, and they were really enthusiastic. So whenever you find people being extremely enthusiastic about a product, technology, there's a very good chance that the technology is interesting. So you remember the iPhone, people queuing up and people, driving Tesla, telling everybody about it, and other examples. So with that, we, went home and started to look at the company. And during due diligence, I thought, why not buy a Bitcoin? And I went to Bitcoin.de, the German exchange.
Yeah.
And I just bought one Bitcoin for 300 euros. And I was like, oh no, the money is probably wasted. 300 euros, you can take the family out for dinner like 4 times or so, and have a good time. And you're blowing the money on the Bitcoin. And I just kept the Bitcoin. And we eventually invested in Bitwala in early 2016. And because of that, I started to learn about it. What is it? What are the properties? What do you do with it? And then, and it still didn't really click. So I had this Bitcoin, I bought a little bit more, but it didn't really click. And in 2016, September, this website Zero Hedge, and they have all kinds of maybe not so mainstream news. And they had a series of articles where they compared the price of the Deutsche Bank stock to the Lehman stock. There was a point with the Lehman stock when it fell below a certain level, everybody lost trust in the bank, and the bank collapsed. And they were comparing the development of the German bank stock to the then development of the Lehman stock, and they basically said if the Deutsche Bank stock falls below 10 euros, the bank will collapse. Maybe it was a bit exaggerated, but I kept reading these. There was a number of articles, reading these articles. And then in late September 2016, it fell below 10 euros. And there were also other articles. Deutsche Bank, they had a huge portfolio of options and derivatives and like 50,000 billion. And obviously, if a bank with that huge portfolio fails as the counterparty,
there's a huge domino effect.
Yeah, a huge domino effect. So it was totally clear that if the bank became under heavy stress, that the whole financial system would have maybe not collapsed, but had a very similar situation like 2008-9. So it fell below 10 euros, and I thought, now maybe if they're right, there's a certain probability that something bad could happen. So what I did during lunch break, I drove to the bank, got some cash, got some gold, and started to a little bit more significantly buying Bitcoin. Where cash, it's outside the financial system. Put it in the safety box. Gold is outside the system, and then also was maybe smart enough to buy Bitcoin. Sent some money to Coinbase, and my wife was like, "Why do you send money to I don't know, Estonia or somewhere funny country?" She was like, "What do you do? Why do you send money to this funny bank account?" And I said, "I buy Bitcoin." She was like, "What do you buy?" so it was still very, very, very early, but the trigger really was to get a little bit money outside of the system because the system might collapse. Deutsche Bank luckily didn't collapse, but I think 2 or 3 years ago, I heard from someone who was actually very much involved in that situation at Deutsche Bank, that it was in fact close to collapse. Because the stock fell and then the trust would have gone away. And I think there was very high-ranking politicians involved in averting that attack on the Deutsche Bank stock. So it could have been just a funny series of articles that are not true, fake news. It wasn't. So once I was then involved, and that was the moment I clicked. I really believe there's a significant risk that the system might be under heavy stress or might even in a way collapse. and I took some money out, and Bitcoin was a way out next to cash and gold.
Yeah, yeah. And on the topic of Deutsche Bank, today in the year of 2024 that we're recording this episode, how's the bank looking? I mean, is it still under stress? Is it better, or like what has changed since then? It's been what, like 8 years since it was on the brink of collapse, and here we are today.
I mean, the stock recovered. So back in 2016, I think it spent a few days, 5 days below 10 euros, and came back up.
Okay.
So and now it's like at 15, but there's some capital increases, and I think they significantly reduced their off-balance derivatives portfolio, and I think they're profitable again. I think they're paying dividends. So
things are okay for now.
I think they're not close. I don't know, but it doesn't look like at all. The market cap is not exciting. It's like a 30 billion. If you compare that market cap to other banks in Europe or even in the US, so it's not as strong and big as it used to be in the 80s and 90s or early 2000s. So luckily, I don't think it. I don't know. I have no inside information, but it seems like they're fairly healthy today. But who never knows? I mean, there might be stress coming up in other places in the world, and that's what we saw when 1.5 years ago, Silicon Valley Bank all of a sudden collapsed with all kinds of funny implications. So we're not talking about Deutsche Bank, but we're talking about a highly leveraged financial system, and due to the high leverage and pressure, increasing interest rates and mortgages maybe defaulting, whatever, there might be stress within the financial systems coming up anytime. Hopefully not, but we don't know.
Yeah, of course. Well, since the pandemic, there's been a lot of money printing and essentially, giving liquidity to the banks. So we'll see. For now, they're patched up, but in the long run, we will see what happens. And as you said, Alex, it's not just exclusive to one big bank, national bank. At the end of the day, they're all interconnected, and it's the whole financial system that's kind of going through turbulent times, and it's not looking good. But at the same time, we never know when things will finish. It can be 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, who knows? But all we know is that all fiat currencies at some point collapse. But when that will happen, it's anyone's guess game. But going back now to essentially your story so 2017/2016 to 17 was your kind of aha moment where you fully comprehended the power of Bitcoin, and so to say, you were fully orange pilled in that spectrum.
Yes.
How has your journey been since then? And essentially, as your role as a VC and investing into startups, you said you invested into Bitwala at the start of 2016. Since then, have you been more heavily involved in investing into Bitcoin startups, or not so? Or you're kind of, it's a different ballgame compared to traditional tech startup investment?
In a way, I mean, it's similar, but it's also different. And unfortunately, there are not so many pure Bitcoin startups. In fact, in Germany, and also I think it's very difficult to find a good working business model. Of course, the trading business model is really working well if you stay very lean and careful, because trading has low margins, and then you need to generate some volume. We invested in a startup that does custody. I think custody is a big topic because it's a little bit tricky to do self-custody. Yeah. And then it's also a little bit tricky to trust third parties again, exchanges or other places. So companies specializing on custody, I think, is really interesting. Frankenberg in Munich, and then we investing company in Frankfurt, Deutsche Digital Assets, and actually they launched in, I think, 21, not an ETF but an ETN. And
what's an ETN? I've never heard of an ETN.
Exchange traded note. So basically, it's like an ETF, but it's structured a different way. So so it's economically it's the same thing as an ETF. It's structured in a different way. It's a note, and you become a creditor. So if the company failed, it could drag down the note. So the German Xetra Gold ETN is also an ETN, not an ETF, because in Europe you cannot have an ETF with just one asset. So there's no gold ETFs or even Bitcoin ETFs in Europe. In Switzerland there is, but not in Europe, in the European Union. And but what they did way before the ETFs were launched, in the US, they had something very similar. And I think that's a good product, because you could just buy it like a stock and have it in your portfolio through the bank. So I think that's a good business model. And then, of course, there's many more interesting business models like payment. Back then, the Lightning Network was just an idea. I think it started to materialize in 2017, so it was very early. But using Lightning to pay, and then the loop closes. Jack Mellors with Strike is doing the same thing as Koala tried to do with the Bitcoin network, but he's using Lightning, and it's, of course, much better suited. I spent a little bit of time in El Salvador in 21. Had a prepaid mobile phone card, and you could easily top it up with paying with Lightning. And it's quite exciting, because you get an invoice and you pay, or you mail the invoice or WhatsApp the invoice to your friend who is rich somewhere on the world, because you don't have any money, and they pay for you. And that's quite exciting. So payment, remittances, and then, of course, and that's maybe I guess that's the big use case of Bitcoin, and not so many startups. You don't need so many startups. I think, at least in long term, it's a tremendous solution for store value. And ever since Corona and all the money printing, we've seen significant inflation. So the use case, store value, is big. Very big, huge. And just the last sentence, like the venture capital perspective, you have a problem, and then you have a solution, and then if the solution is really good, the startup becomes very valuable. So, and I think with that lens, with that perspective, the problem of inflation is a huge problem. M2, the worldwide money, is 80 trillion American trillion. And if we assume worldwide inflation on average being 5%, and maybe it's higher, but let's just say 5%, then 5% of 80 trillion is 4 trillion is being evaporated every year. That's pretty much the GDP of Germany. And that's a huge problem. And it's not the current solutions, like buying real estate and putting your money in the bank account, getting very little interest, are either no solutions or
weak solutions.
And I think Bitcoin might be a very strong solution. So I spent some time in Africa just recently.
How's Bitcoin adoption in Africa?
I accelerated it.
Nice. Good.
Seriously, we were in Namibia, and there was a guide, and we ended up running in the morning, not an official activity. And then I asked him what he does with his money if he has some money left. And he puts it in the bank account, obviously. He has a bank account, which not everybody has, but he had one, and that's it. And the Namibian dollar is connected to the rand, the South African rand. It's 1-to-1. And the South African rand lost 2/3 in the last 20 years towards the euro or the dollar. It used to be 1-to-1 to the dollar. I don't know when, in the 70s or 80s. Now it's 20-to-1. And obviously, you have very significant devaluation in those African countries. And I asked some people, they don't buy stocks. So obviously, if you have very little money left at the end of the month, say $10, you cannot buy a stock, you cannot buy an apartment, and you cannot buy a gold coin. You can buy nothing.
The only thing you can buy is some sats.
Yeah, you can buy some sats, and there's exchanges, and they seem to be okay, and you can withdraw the Bitcoin into your own wallet. So Bitcoin is a solution in many areas of the world where there's significant challenges with the store value of fiat currencies.
Of course, and talking on the point on the subject of use cases, I mean, I'm sure you saw this firsthand. Essentially, how you can transmit Bitcoin payments via just mobile GPS SMSs, right? You don't need a smartphone. You can have the old school Nokia, what we call the dumb phone. Which is incredible, right? Which most people think, like, what happens if there's no internet? I get this argument from no coiners. They say, well, if there's no internet, you can't transmit, your Bitcoin transaction. I say, well, actually, no, that there is a way, and I find that fascinating, especially in the continent of Africa, which has been so deprived for centuries, and going back to the slavery days. These people have always been taken advantage of, and they're always last two things. But going back to how we started this call and off the record, when I mentioned to you, Alex, that I had experience going to Kenya ever since I was born. Back then, already M-Pesa had the phone payments 20 years ago, and when the developed world, the Western world, had no mobile payments, it was still all wire payments and then credit cards. And there, people in the middle of the savannah are just popping out their Nokia 3310 and sending each other money. And I was like, wow, like these guys are light years ahead, yet in reality, like economically, they're way behind. And I always thought that Bitcoin is this ideal technology for this community of people that are already so, accustomed to sending money over phones, that now it's just, pure clean money that nobody can rug pull them. So I think it's only a matter of time with education and people, showing them that there is this alternative, that Africa is going to be booming under the Bitcoin standard.
Totally. And Africa is fascinating because they have, in a way, no legacy, established systems, so they can easily leapfrog to the next.
It's a clean slate.
Exactly. And they're very young. So the average age in Africa is 19, and in Germany, I think it's 44, 46 or something. And obviously, if you're 19, you're much more open to innovation than you're 46.
Of course.
So that's really, really fascinating. So out of a weakness, I think there's huge opportunity coming up. And that's why I'm very bullish. And in Africa, we were in Namibia and South Africa, and I haven't seen more, but will in the future. And everywhere you can pay with like Visa and MasterCard. I think that's great, and it makes it very convenient, but it's expensive because the fees are, I don't know, between 2% and 5%.
Oh wow!
Which is a lot. And you don't have final settlement. So when you pay with a Visa card, the merchant, they get their money. Actually, we were at a restaurant in Namibia, and I asked if I could put the tip on the bill, and they said yes. And then I did that, and then we left the restaurant, and then I came back because I had realized I had given not enough. And then I went back to the restaurant and said, sorry, I made a mistake. I didn't tip enough. So can I give another tip? And then they said, yeah, of course, you can. And then I wanted to pay with a credit card, but there was very little. So I said, what do you prefer, cash or credit card? And then they said, well, cash. And I said, why? And they said, it takes 6 months when you tip with credit card until they get their tip. So the settlement process, and that might be related to the restaurant, but also to the whole system. So the point is the settlement period is long. It could be longer than we think. And in that case, they said we get our tip when it's paid with credit card in 6 months. So if you tip with Bitcoin, it's instant. It's instant. And with Lightning, it's more or less free. It's free. So I think it's a big use case.
For sure. Especially for people in those environments that really need that cash today to settle all and pay the salaries and pay the rents and pay all the produce. 6 months is crazy. I had a guess when you were explaining, Alex, I said weeks, but then you said 6 months, and I was like, oh my God, 6 months. Like it can be a totally different world in 6 months. Like it's crazy. And then when we put into the aspect ratio of inflation in 6 months, well, that tip is even less than what you should be getting today, right? So So go ahead.
Inflation, I think in Namibia is 4-5%, so it's not huge.
But still,
officially, we don't know how the inflation really is. So it doesn't take away a lot. But that's another cost. If it's 5%, 6 months, it's 2.5% that's being lost during the time. And maybe the basket that's relevant for you has a higher inflation. So yes, and so my venture capital perspective on Bitcoin is a problem solution perspective, and that's how great companies come up. There's a huge problem, and then they solve it, and people like it, and then the company all of a sudden is like worth $100 billion.
Yeah,
it takes a while, but yes.
But eventually gets there.
Yeah, and that's Bitcoin. Bitcoin is addressing many, many, many huge problems because everybody in the world, like 8 or 9 billion people, are handling with money,
Yeah.
and we know it's hard to see, but because in Europe and in the US, the fiat system is fairly strong in the short term, obviously, and it's hard to really understand the challenges you have if the currency is inflating with like 50% per year or more.
Of course, you cannot imagine it. I mean, it's one thing hearing it, another thing is living in it. It changes your full perspective on saving and how to operate your body. And it's kind of, I was listening recently to one podcast. I can't remember which one, but they were talking about how people in these hyperinflated countries, they have two jobs. They have the day job, and then they have the money manager job on how do I save the money that I'm getting. And they're constantly, shuffling. Is it US dollars? Is it, stable coins? Is it whatnot, which is insane. People are already working so hard. The fact that then you also have to be, and not everybody has financial literacy to be making the right decisions. And in most cases, most people do nothing. They just, as you said, example in Africa, the guy just puts it in the bank and it's just evaporating, which is crazy. Now, on the topic of Bitcoin being this savior of sound money, and you mentioned a great example of Jack Mallers' strike, which is doing huge things. I mean, now I believe they expanded to Europe, and altogether they're serving over 100 countries. You can go in there, open an account. You can DCA automatically, daily, weekly, whatever it is. I believe they also do free fee withdrawals to your cold storage, which is insane and amazing. I applaud him, which pushes people to take keys into their own hands, because you don't want to be leaving, keys on exchanges or banks or whatnot. Do you see, Alex, more kind of these EMIs and kind of digital banks pushing towards Bitcoin services, or you think they're on the same side as traditional banks? They're kind of wary and they don't really want to kind of fully promote it just yet. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, we see also in Europe increasing adoption on all levels. So obviously the first adoption wave is like private people, people who start to understand it, maybe want to speculate, they buy Bitcoin. And then with 4 years ago, Michael Saylor, August 10, it's going to be the Michael Saylor day, August 10. He started to buy Bitcoin, and so the company adoption. And the effect is amazing. I mean, MicroStrategy outperformed every other stock in the S&P 500, including NVIDIA. Barely, but including NVIDIA. So, I mean, that should get your attention, because obviously something is working. And then 3 years ago, we saw the first step of company adoption, and like El Salvador making Bitcoin
legal tender.
Legal tender. So, and El Salvador is developing extremely well. It's not because of Bitcoin. Maybe Bitcoin plays a smaller part. It's because of, I guess, good policies and innovation and keeping the country safe, significantly reducing crime, attracting smart people and companies, and so it's doing well. So Bitcoin, maybe it plays a smaller part, but maybe it plays a part. And then we haven't really seen, maybe we see it or we don't know it, is Federal Reserve adoption. So the Swiss National Bank, they said they could buy Bitcoin, but they haven't. But what they did, they bought MicroStrategy as part of their huge stock portfolio.
Which is the second best, right? Apart from buying Bitcoin.
Yeah. Well, it's levered, and actually it outperformed Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Since August 10. So it's something else, but it's close. And also the Norwegian fund bought Bitcoin. And Bhutan has been mining Bitcoin for a number of years. I'm going there actually in the end of September. And there's a good chance that we meet the, I guess, king. And
the happiest king in the world.
Yeah, and I hopefully I get the opportunity to ask the question what their Bitcoin strategy is. So obviously they put it on the reserve, and then maybe other countries buy it. El Salvador is buying 1 Bitcoin per day for a number of days. It's significantly successful.
Yep.
Improving their credit rating, lowering interest rate costs, building a reserve for things they can do. And maybe other countries. So there's several waves of adoption, and I think a later wave of adoption are the banks. And what we've seen, and it's amazing, is Swiss banks, the Luzerner Kantonalbank, they launched next to other Kantonalbanken, but also Postfinanz and others, and the digital banks like Amira and Signum and Swissquote, you can buy Bitcoin through your bank account, and it's just a business. Why? It's very easy to explain. They have seen, well, our clients send money off to Bitcoin exchanges and then send it back, and then you can figure out the fee potential that money basically triggers. And they said, well, it's significant, so let's offer it ourselves and those fees. So in Germany, we haven't seen any bank directly offering lagging behind in Germany. But there's some banks who are pushing quite a bit, like Volksbank Bayern Mitte, helping their clients to buy Bitcoin, not directly through the bank, but like through exchanges. But they have some business
bridging clients to the exchanges, basically.
Exactly. So yes, I think the traditional financial players and banks are actually determined to be those, will be integrating Bitcoin more and more. And one of the original ideas of a bank is, I have money, I have gold, I don't want to keep it at home, I store it with the bank. And storing Bitcoin is technically, I think, a little bit difficult, but it's one of the core functions of a bank. And I think they will approach that.
Apart from also lending, right? To me, the bank main kind of cash cow is lending, right? You come get your loan, it lends out, and with fractional reserve lending, I mean reserves, essentially the bank does the huge part of lending. Where in Bitcoin, it's a little bit hard with lending. I mean, there is some great projects from DeFi, and they're more and more, and Unchained is got some great solutions. But yeah, it's a big question mark on kind of banks have. It's an oxymoron. They're offering a solution to an asset which actually kind of prevents them from doing their job, which they're meant to do. So, but
a big use case, what bank could do, and some are doing it, is using Bitcoin as a collateral for loan. So I want to buy an apartment, but I don't want to sell my Bitcoin. So I go to the bank and say, well,
get a collateral.
Could I get a loan? I want to buy this apartment, and on top of the apartment being a collateral, I offer my Bitcoin as a collateral, and then I can buy maybe a bigger apartment. And then over time, I pay it back, and either through salary or maybe at some later point, I sell a little bit of the Bitcoin and pay the loan back. And that's an easy use case. I mean, it's really easy. And if you do it smartly, you can generate some fees as a bank. You should. I mean. Look at it, banks, and do it. Offer it. You can make money.
Well, I guess banks are also these kind of ancient institutions that they've been doing business the same way for centuries, that now kind of Bitcoin came on the scene and, trying to revolutionize everything. And it's nice to see that they're kind of changing their stance on it. Because if we just rewind a few years back, or for example, Alex, when you were back on your Bitcoin journey in 2016, no bank wanted to deal with Bitcoin. They were all like, "Oh no, this is terrorist financing. We don't want to touch it. We don't want to hear it." I mean, not even 2016, maybe even like 3-4 years ago, most banks were very opposed to it. And then it's kind of, that Gandhi quote, when first they fight you, then they laugh at you, and then, they join you and then you win. We're kind of in this third stage of they join you because they realize, if we oppose it and just drive people away, we're going to lose business. And in the long run, we're going to be losing out. So I guess now it's this kind of incubator sandbox moment for banks to figure out what's the best kind of solution that we could offer to our clients.
Yeah, I mean, can you easily, you get a salary and then you send a few €100 one time or regularly to an exchange, and then it's totally clear that it's not terrorist financing. It's just an investment or saving. Maybe there's another aspect I think that's important. Banks essentially are IT companies. Huge IT is really important. And it's difficult because they started to digitize very early, and then they had old mainframe systems, and now they're stuck with the old systems that are complicated and stuff. So you have to reproduce the whole IT architecture, which is difficult, of course. So that's why people complain a little bit about IT. But they also, it's a huge challenge to get great IT talent. They have options, and I asked one of the leading professors in Germany, the students studying computer science, where do the best students go? Of the
All
class.
IT companies.
Where do they go? And he said, with very few exceptions, the top three always go to Silicon Valley. And I said, well, how much money do they make? He said, $1 million a year. So that's kind of tough to get those, because you cannot offer $1 million to a computer science graduate. So maybe but the point is, what's the point? The point is, how do you attract great talent? So maybe you give them great things to work on, and if you tell them, well, we're trying to offer Bitcoin, that might be interesting for some of them. And also, I think Pocket and there's also other Pocket out of Switzerland, but also other, they offer a service where you can pay your employees not only in Swiss francs and euros, but also in Bitcoin. So it's and you can say, well, I want to have like up to 20% of my payment,
Salary.
not in fiat, but in Bitcoin. Well, what's the effect? The effect is that's a great argument in recruitment. So you could argue, well, everybody can take the fiat and buy the Bitcoin themselves. Yes, but still, it's a little bit more convenient. It improves the image. It conveys the message of innovation. We're doing new things. So for any company, but especially banks who are in the core of their production, IT companies, I think looking at Bitcoin and asking the questions how to integrate the Bitcoin in our operations in the value chain, it's worth it. Look at it. It might improve
getting the talent through.
Yes. And if you get if you have the questions, I offer a salary in Bitcoin, or I pay $1 million to get those best 3 graduates studying computer science. Maybe it's a much cheaper way to offer payment in Bitcoin.
And I think, Peter McCormack, made this quote famously popular, the cheat code, right? Whenever you're offering something in Bitcoin, may that be a service or maybe that be remuneration, it makes you stand out from the rest, right? Everybody's always, looking what's my unique selling point? How do I be different from my next door competitor? And offering salaries in Bitcoin, I think that would be a very popular way to get young talent, which are hardcore Bitcoiners, and they value their time and energy that they're putting in. And if they can get paid in Bitcoin, it's a big plus. So I think you brought up a really interesting point there, Alex.
There's another point. I know a guy who operates a small but profitable e-commerce company, and he takes PayPal fiat, but he also takes crypto, Bitcoin, but also others. And the point is taking. So when he compares the customers who pay fiat, who pay Bitcoin, the average basket size is significantly larger when they pay with Bitcoin. Obviously, no fees, like fiat fees are significant, and the returns are significantly lower. So the unit economics, the economics of an e-commerce company, is significantly better when the customers pay with crypto, Bitcoin, and it's better.
An instant settlement. You don't have to wait. I'm sure it's not 6 months, but still with PayPal, I think you need to wait a few weeks or a month for it to clear, or I don't know how it is. It's definitely much longer. And if you have a business where you're selling and reordering, that instant settlement plays a huge role.
Yeah, and no defaults.
And no defaults.
I think the average is like between 1% and 2% defaults of the revenue. Well, that's margin.
And another one, chargeback, right? How many people paying with credit cards going, applying for that chargeback and then going for the dispute? Bitcoin transactions are one-way transaction. Like, once it's broadcasted on the network, there's no oh, sorry, I want my money back. There's different disputes for that. So
the big picture is, I think, adopting Bitcoin creates value for individuals who store value and maybe payment. Can create value for any type of company, banks, and any company that offers maybe Bitcoin salary payments. Obviously, creates value for countries, and we don't totally understand the value that Bitcoin generated in El Salvador, but it definitely created value.
Yeah.
And we'll maybe learn about Bhutan shortly. And also maybe it creates value for central banks. So the whole discussion to have a Bitcoin, to add Bitcoin to a fiat currency. Donald Trump said it, but also others said it. It's not Bitcoin against fiat. Maybe it's Bitcoin supporting fiat. Just like the dollar was supported with gold until 71, maybe there's an opportunity to support the fiat currency, the dollar with Bitcoin, and increase trust. It maybe goes down a little bit and increase trust, but maybe also increase the value, maybe stop a little bit the monetary expansion. So the whole point, and that's the Bitcoin technology, it's the Bitcoin as a token, the Bitcoin, it creates value all over the place. And because of that, I'm totally convinced that the adoption continues to actually accelerate. And obviously, with accelerating adoption, there's more solutions, there's more value creating opportunities, more people thinking about creative ways to increase the use case. And that again increases adoption. It's a classical network effect.
Yeah.
And by that, it's extremely likely that the value will keep going up.
Well, that's inevitable because there's a limited amount of units, right? There's only 21 million Bitcoin there will ever be. So the more that people jump on the bandwagon and start buying and saving those sats, less and less is on the market, right? At the moment, as the time of this recording, we have 450 Bitcoin being mined every single day. And that's nothing if you compare to, forget the 8 billion, but even let's say 500 million or 1 billion people, looking to transact in it and saving it on a daily basis. I mean, the supply, it's minimal. Like, we're talking about people DCAing a few 10,000 sats a month, not like a few million sats like people are now with a few $100.
Yeah.
So,
and I think it's always extremely difficult to look into the future, because futures are known and we don't know what happens. Yes. And it's extremely easy in hindsight to look at what happened. But I just want to give you an example. I used to be a huge Apple fan as a user in the mid-90s. And then Apple was about to go bankrupt.
Yeah.
And it was extremely close to failure. And then it didn't fail because Microsoft invested in equity in Apple. Because they didn't want to have a monopoly, so they wanted to keep Apple alive. And then Steve Jobs returned, and then the iMac, and obviously especially the iPod, and then the iPhone. So if you jump back in time in the mid 90s, but also in the early 2000s, I think when the iPod launched, Apple had a market cap of 4 billion, but they also had 4 billion in cash, so the company was worthless. So if someone had told you it's going to be the most valuable company in the world just 20 years later, and the value will be 3,000 billion, a factor of 750 based on the 4 billion. Everybody would say,
no way,
it's not possible. You're stupid. And so Mike Saylor, he says, if Bitcoin captures 7% of the 900 trillion assets, all of the assets, stocks, bonds, real estate, and so on, if it just captures 7%, then it's like 13 million or 14 million per Bitcoin. And obviously, I say that, well, or he says it, he says it, Bitcoin could reach 14 million in 21 years. That's the time frame he says. And everybody says, like, oh, he's crazy. And maybe it does. Maybe it does. So from a pure investment perspective, just
it's fantastic returns.
And Hal Finney, I think in early 2011 said, and I think Bitcoin was below $1. That's a very famous quote. He said, because Bitcoin will be very valuable, as we all know, Bitcoin will be very valuable, reaching 1 million in the future. We should think about how we put that unearned wealth to good use. So he was pointing towards using the value appreciating appreciating to make big party and buy a yacht, but do something good for society.
To make humanity better, to improve it.
But the point is, he said when Bitcoin was below $1, it could reach 1 million.
Crazy.
So we're still a little bit away from 1 million. I think we will reach it at some point in the very early, or in the early 30s. But his vision was below $1, 1 million. So from that perspective, the 13 or 14 million that Michael Saylor says today is not that big.
Doesn't sound crazy when we're at $55,000-$60,000, right? We're far off the $1 mark when Hal Finney said it.
Yes, 50,000. So that's the difficult thing about innovation. It's so hard to really. Maybe in the short term we overestimate the potential. In the long run we
underestimate it.
Very significantly underestimate the potential. So just from that perspective, anyone, I mean, government representatives, people in parliament, CEOs of large and small companies, and everyone, we should learn about it and try to understand it a little bit. And in a way, it's complicated, yes, and also because it's new and different, and it's technically complicated. But then it's also very easy because to understand a company, it's so difficult. I mean, you have to understand the competition, technology trajectories. You have to understand the market. You have to understand the management, and it's very hard next to impossible to understand all the factors. And then everything is very dynamic. You have innovation changing the playing field all the time. So in a way, I think Bitcoin is much easier to understand because it's less complicated than just to understand one company, and then understand industries and regions and everything. So in a way, the point I'm making is it's easier to understand than one might think.
For sure, and especially when you compare it to how does traditional money work, or how do central banks work? You know, it's you definitely won't put the definition of how a central bank works on 11 pages and call it a white paper. You know, it's going to be 11,000 pages, and you're still going to be wondering how does it work. And the beauty of Bitcoin, as you mentioned, Alex, is kind of the simplicity. I think people, because you can't compare Bitcoin to anything, it's so radically new as an idea, philosophy, and asset, that people straight away think, oh, you know, I don't understand this. But once you put in some reading, and the first place I push people to read is those 11 pages, the white paper, which you can read that in 1 hour, you know, and that on itself, just, it gives you a pretext to the formal introduction to what is Bitcoin. And then, you know, you have great readings such as Saif Dinamus's book, The Bitcoin Standard. And now in 2024, I mean, I have a full shelf there of books. There's so many fantastic Bitcoin books that you can read. And every time you read another book, another puzzle is added to your picture, you know, and slowly you're building this picture where you're like, oh my God, you know, Bitcoin's not just changing money, it's changing the whole way that humanity is going to be living their life in, you know. And going back to what you mentioned, Alex, and you know, Hal Finney's vision wasn't for people to be living in mansions and driving Lamborghinis, but building, you know, preserving the wealth to build a better future, which I think Bitcoin really does, because the more you go deeper down the rabbit hole, which is kind of on the contrary what people expect, you know, they think you get more greedy and you want, you know, the golden Rolex on your hand. But no, you want to be living a pure, healthy life, preserving for your kids, spending essentially Bitcoin, to me, which is the big aspect value why I love Bitcoin, it gives you more control over your time, which is the most important asset that we have. No matter if you're Alex, Michael Saylor, Jack Dorsey, we all have 60 seconds in a minute, you know, 24 hours in a day, and it's down to us and our, you know, ability to use them how we want to do it. And the fiat system and the legacy markets where, you know, you have your 9 to 5, or in most cases people work 9 to 8 because they have over hours and they don't have time to spend with their families, and they come home, you know, destroyed, tired, and then they're depressed. And then we see why we have such a drug epidemic is because people just want to escape this miserable life. And then with Bitcoin, it's the total opposite, where you're doing what you love, selling your goods and services for Bitcoin, which you truly believe and trust. And with time, you are getting more, you know, freedom of how much time you want to allocate to your actual craftsmanship and how much you want to evaluate to being the father, the husband that you want to be, and really enjoying yourself. Like you said, Alex, the previous month of August, you spent, you know, full month traveling through Africa, hiking in Switzerland. If you have a traditional job, there's no way you can take a month out and just go explore the world, and this is something that Bitcoin truly gives you. So
yeah, totally. And in a way, Bitcoin is a time machine.
Yeah.
You work an hour and you make some money, and then you can basically transfer that
For the
money,
future.
but then really the time behind it into the future, and in the long run, like 30 years, 40 years, or even longer, you have extremely high inflation, even in very stable currencies, even like the Swiss franc, because if you have 2% inflation, then the value of the money is being halved, cut down by 50% in 35 years. So 35 years is a long time, but if you work and you think about retirement or the education of your children, or the retirement of your children, then it's kind of bad that 50% gets taken away after all the taxes that you paid and everything. So I have a funny story to tell. We were in Namibia, and then in the lodge there was the opportunity to visit Bushmen, Sun people. And still today they live in a very traditional way, how they used to live. And they would show us their crafts. They would also show us how they lived and how they hunted. They didn't really hunt, but they showed us how they would hunt. And they don't have the concept of saving because where they live, there's enough animals to hunt. And then they hunt an animal, and then they eat it. So being a good hunter is really important. You become chief of the tribe if you're the best hunter. So hunting is really important because you need to hunt more or less every day. And if you 1 or 2 days you don't find anything, that's okay. You eat a little bit less, and then you eat sometimes. But it's really important to hunt. And it's important to hunt because they don't save. And I asked one of the guys we could talk to, what about saving? And he was laughing at me. He was laughing as if I had something really funny, like moving to Mars or flying to Mars. and they don't have the concept of saving. And I think it works for them, but quite honestly, they still live like they used to live 10,000 years ago, more or less. And I think the concept of saving is the basis for innovation, for investment, for wealth, for a sophisticated society. And if saving is being eroded because of high inflation, it's bad. And if saving is being incentivized because of attractive investment options, and I think Bitcoin does that, I think it's very, very, very good for society.
But going back to when Bushman laughed at you, I mean, did you understand why that concept is so alien to them? I guess they don't have, for example, a fridge, right, to preserve that meat by hunting, right? They do it on the go. It's similar to Japanese technology of GIT, right? Just in time, you go, you kill the cow, you eat it, and then next day you go to do the next one. There is no saving for winter months.
Exactly, and you can do that because there's plenty of wild animals you can hunt, and also there's no seasons. Indeed, and if there's a long winter, like in Europe, and the animals go away and nothing grows on the trees and no plants grow, then you
have no choice but to save.
Yeah, you're forced to save because if you don't, you die. And they're not forced to save, and that very positive environment. It's easy. It's not easy, but it's possible to live without saving. Made them not to understand the concept of saving, and it works well for them in a way. But then in a way, it doesn't, because without saving, they're busy hunting all day, and that's it. They don't develop any technologies or few technologies, and they're stuck.
Yeah, but it's a simple life, right? Sometimes a simple life.
They were very happy.
I was going to say that I'm sure they were happy, and sometimes less is more. As I said at the beginning, we always think you're working to get this next big thing or the next iPhone, that's going to make me happier. And then you realize that no, it actually doesn't. Like the less you declutter, and this is another thing I think that Bitcoin strives and kind of grills into your mind, that maybe not extreme minimalism, but like, question yourself, do you really want to spend your hard-earned money on buying this next gadget or the next clothes line that came out, which at the end of the day, you look at your wardrobe and you have 50 t-shirts, you don't need another t-shirt for 100 euros. And it really questions, definitely to me, ever since I've been more or less living on a Bitcoin standard for the last 3-4 years, like, ask me what I bought clothes-wise. Well, probably the only apparel I buy is at Bitcoin conferences, like my collectible t-shirts. But apart from that, I don't really buy anything. I had so many t-shirts from before, and it's really shifted my mind to, do I want to spend this or not? Which I think is very positive.
It's the same with me. I voluntarily buy clothes every 4 years, roughly. And then a year ago, my wife said, we need to go. And then we went to a store, and I was forced to buy clothes, and it was necessary also. And totally. And because I don't know. I mean, yeah. So, and I think by not spending, which traditional Keynesian economists would say that's bad for society because it reduces demand and it pushes the economy in a deflationary spiral, and by reducing consumption, being modest, being happy with what you have, opening the room for investment and advancement, I think it's also good for the planet.
I was going to say this was my next point. This over-consumerism, all these T-shirts and shoes being done, and then it doesn't sell out, and they throw it on landfills. It's insane. Like,
actually, in early 21, I moved on a full Bitcoin standard for 2 weeks. So I only spent with Bitcoin, and obviously that's difficult in Germany because no one, very few accept Bitcoin. But I used a Visa card that directly went against a Bitcoin wallet. And 2 weeks, I paid everything with that card, and then it reduced my Bitcoin stack. And it was very interesting. It was like in the early 21 bull run, and Bitcoin was going up. and so what happened? I paid less. I went to the bakery, and I didn't buy six little breads, but 4. I said, well, I eat less. Really. And then, but also that was one effect, spending less. But then I said, well, now that I'm spending my Bitcoin, I want to have good quality. So I tended to buy, and it's a little bit contradictory, I tended to buy more expensive things, better quality, which in the long run, if you buy a washing machine that's 50% more expensive, it's cheaper because it lasts much longer. So, and then that was the second effect. The third effect was on the way back home from the bakery, I was like, and I rebought the Bitcoin. So I ended up with more Bitcoin. But it's an interesting fact that, some economists tell us saving is bad because it destroys the economy, because it takes away demand. And I think it's so good. It's so good for the planet. So that's one aspect where Bitcoin is good for the planet. And the other aspect is it can use stranded energy and incentivizes the expansion of renewable energy, which we see in Bhutan and in other places in the world, especially if the energy is at a place where there's no people. You can still use it.
True.
So it doesn't burn the planet. So, and I think we could go on and on forever, but the whole point is, once you start to understand Bitcoin, there might also be some negative effects. I don't know, but there's also positive effects, many more positive effects than we think. And I'm surprised, and that's the journey since 2016. I'm surprised to learn about more and more positive effects that the technology has. And that's, I think, the point I'm trying to make. That should be the incentive for everyone to start understanding it.
Yeah, no, I'm to kind of round that statement that you said, Alex, is you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. It really does. And with what you said, it's a pure incentive for people. You don't have to go out and buy and put X amount of your capital in it. Just start studying it. Just start seeing the effects, and then once you're slowly getting the grasp of it, start getting some. And like Alex perfectly explained, try and spend it, or at least denominate things in Bitcoin terms, in sats as a unit of account, you will see yourself, spending more smartly. And to a certain extent, spending more on a certain good is a smart decision to do, because it will last you longer. Like in the washing machine example, I'm sure also the 50% more expensive washing machine is also more energy efficient. So you'll be paying less monthly for the bills of running it.
Yes.
It balances out over the long run,
I gave a speech at the University of Mannheim in April 2017, and Bitcoin had just passed 1,000 euros and dollars, like 1,200, 1,400.
Yeah.
And I was very bold and very convinced. And I told the students then, if you just buy one Bitcoin, and they were like 20, 22 or so, if you just buy one Bitcoin, I do believe that your finances are settled for your retirement. That one Bitcoin pays you, make sure that you can retire safely. We all know the retirement system all over the world, but Germany is a little bit stressed also. And and I think that's true still today. And maybe you don't even need a full Bitcoin, because when you're 22, you have around about 40 years or more until you retire. In 40 years, and we've seen 2017 to 24 factor 40. And so that's 7 years, factor 40. So so maybe in 40 years, another factor 40 or more, much more. And then if you're capable of buying maybe even only half a Bitcoin, I think in the very long run, over 40 years, it can sell. It could solve. We don't know. It could also not solve. No financial advice, but an incentive to think about it. It could solve in the long run many issues. Also, paying for education in Germany it's free, but in the US you pay in a good college 80,000 fees per year. That's a lot.
Or another factor. I mean, your later stage of life, when you need elderly care. Most people don't think about that. They will need, maybe sometime once they're incapable. I went through this own experience with my own father, who's not even that old. He's 72 years old, but we had to put him into an old people's home for a period of time. And you wouldn't believe it. It costs like 3,500 euros a month. Like, I was complaining about my rent being, just under 2,000. And then you're like, poof, you have this and that. And if you don't, the pension that he would be he's getting, it's like 400 euros. Like it's not, it doesn't cover none of that, and people don't think of, you will need some money in the future. God knows if you need that help, where are you going to get it from? And going to your example with the Bitcoin, even if you have a tenth of a Bitcoin, let's say 10 million sats, and let's say in 40 years time, let's not go as bullish as 14 million, but it's at $1 million, you still have 100,000, which will be much more than you getting relying on a pension, which will probably, equivalent the 400 euros then won't be getting you much. So, and, eventually, as you said, for a period of 40 years, if you just DCA a little bit, a certain amount every month, may that be 5, 10%, or if you're more risk averse, go 15, 20%. It's not radically going to change your life today, but in the future, even in 10 years, you're going to be living a such more freer life. And if nothing, if the least, you will have more time to allocate to what you want to do. You might want to leave your miserable job that you don't like, or multiply jobs, as most people, including myself. I have 2 fiat mine jobs today, which I'm looking to exit in this next epoch. And I'm sure most Gen Zs have 2 jobs because it's pretty crazy with inflation. You can't sustain yourself on a single one and live the true comfortable life that you want to live. After a period of time, you can leave all that behind and push your, what you're passionate in. May that be, education, helping other people in whatever craftsman you are specialized in. May that be a musician, artist, whatever it is, you have the full freedom to enjoy the life, which is very short. And a lot of time people forget that life, we have one life. It's not like we have a video game where we have 100 lives. One life finishes, boop, you're resynced into the level 1 of the game. You have one life, and it goes very fast. And I'm sure you can confirm this, Alex. The older you get, the life is just like turbo going faster. Like it snaps in a day, right?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if it's exactly true, but I heard a few years ago that the way you experience how time passes when you're 18, it's 50% of your life has passed. So the first 18 years take as long as the remaining
50%.
years from 18 to 80, because it feels like the time accelerates more and more. And when I was a student in high school, actually, I was working in a factory holiday job, and because I come from an area where there's many car manufacturers, and I worked at an assembly line, and we had very short breaks. You had like a 5-minute break, and I pulled out a book and read the book, and then of course the break is gone like this. Also the 15-minute break, and then I watched some people just sitting there, not even talking, just sitting there. And I thought, oh, those guys are stupid. They don't even read the book. And then I for some reason, I tried to sit there also. And then time moves much slower.
Much slower.
Much slower. You can. I mean, you're at the mobile phone, and then whoosh, an hour is gone. And then you sit in a park without the phone, without a book, and you just sit there for an hour. That's a long time. So as there's much and more content in our lives, through media, through the smartphone, through technology, it does accelerate. You can easily test that. And I think it's a good time. I think we should decelerate once in a while. And yes, life accelerates even more. Yeah, in a second it's gone, and then it's gone. You're dead forever.
True. And you're questioning, was it worth scrolling on TikTok and Instagram for the last 3 hours, which you will never get back, and you got no value out of it? If anything, you feel unhappy with, you don't have that shiny car, you don't have this, you're seeing people boating around the world, and you are sitting on your couch and not being able to go anywhere. It actually like demotivates you, instead of, as Bitcoin, truly does inspire you to be a better person, to improve a little bit every day, and stack harder and be a humble human, right? Not flunk your Gucci jackets, but be an.
So for all the listeners of that show, so the trigger is now, instead of going on Instagram, TikTok, even Twitter.
Yeah.
So next time you have the urge to go on those, don't go. Go to bitcoin.org, I think org.
Yeah.
And download the white paper and read the white paper. And maybe it changes your life.
True. Those 30 minutes will be much more well spent than scrolling any of the social media. But amazing. So I guess we'll slowly wrap it up. I could keep going to this, and I'm sure, Alex, we could do this into a 3-hour podcast, but we're not at Joe Rogan level just yet. So we'll stick to the usual timeframes. But this is definitely not the last time we'll have you on, Alex, because I'm very intrigued with your visit soon to Bhutan. And if you manage to get to speak to them, having that conversation or without, I would still love to have you back and invite you on the show after your Bhutan experience, because I'm also apart from having the first person with a VC background on the show, I don't have any guests that visited Bhutan, and there's been a lot of talk. And I'm also very interested, not just the fact that it's recognized as the happiest country in the world, but also their Bitcoin mining and their own Bitcoin strategy, which I find very intriguing. And I would love to invite you back, Alex, after your visit to discuss what's happening in Bhutan firsthand, from your own eyes and experiences. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of other points to pick up and discuss further and share some value with our lovely listeners.
Yeah. Happy to come on the show again. It was very energizing, Gigi. And that's what it is. Bitcoin is stored energy. It energizes you personally. It energizes society. It energizes the whole economic system, I think, in a very positive way. Yeah. And my advice is, the first thing is to buy a book, or to learn about it, and not buy Bitcoin. And the other advice is also to do dollar cost average, not to jump in all at once, but have tiny steps. I think in most scenarios it's the superior way to buy, and it's the less stressful way to buy.
Buy to cold storage and forget about it. Don't spend hours on TradingView looking at the chart prices, where is it going, and it's much more peaceful price.
Yeah, and the most important advice is don't sell.
Yeah, that's probably the most important one. But Alex, I'd like to thank you again for taking the time to come on. Where can we send our listeners to get in touch and follow you online? What's the best place?
I'm on Twitter, and my handle is just do it Alex. It's also on Telegram, just do it Alex, and on most social networks, it's just do it Alex. So
and Noster, are you not yet part of the Nostrich family, or are you?
I'm part of the Noster family. I'm not using it very actively. I have to admit. I can my public key. I can send it to
no
you.
need for the public key. We will put it in the description. But most importantly, baby steps, as you said, Alex. Most important thing is that you have, and slowly it will pick up. But I try to push every guest to ask them if they're on Noster or not, because there's a lot of censorship going around, as we can see. And X, for all in your country, maybe tomorrow. You don't have to be in Brazil. You can be somewhere else. They will close it down. It's always nice to have a backup in case the lights go off, that you have some way to connect with fellow people.
I think within the legal framework, obviously, we have to, I think, governments are necessary and they're important. I think also they need to be strong, maybe a bit more limited, like lean and fit. is a good strategy for many things, but within the legal framework, I think free speech is very important. And I think Elon Musk, I'm not a big fan of him personally because I think he's a difficult person. He's a genius, and he once said, I don't know if it's originally from him. He said, free speech includes to accept opinions you don't agree with from people you don't like, and as long as they're within the legal framework. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, well, what a better way to close it. Freedom of speech. Alex, thank you once again, and we look forward to having you back in the near future. All the best.
Thank you, Gigi. Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, I would highly appreciate it if you could boost, rate, review, and subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice. It would greatly help us spread these incredible stories and the message of Bitcoin freedom. Also, feel free to reach out to me and follow our social media accounts on X, Noster, YouTube, TikTok. I appreciate all of your support, and make sure to tune in next Thursday for the next episode. Thanks for listening, and remember to stack sats and stay humble.